This video covers setting up a full production server. Its main purpose really is to show off the new Docker Compose version of ConnextCMS. The reason we decided to switch to Docker Compose is because the setup for setting up ConnextCMS, or Keystone.js for that matter, is really complex. Different versions of Node compiler may or may not work, and a lot of things change based on the development environment that you're in. So we switched to using Docker because it creates sort of an operating system agnostic setup environment. Theoretically, anything that can run in a Docker container can run on any operating system that can run a Docker container. So that's one of the main advantages of Docker, and by creating a Docker Compose script, it's now possible to install ConnextCMS with a single command. And again, it should be operating system agnostic. It should work. In this video, I'm going to show how to set up a complete production server, and that includes an SSL certificate for HTTPS and encrypted web services. I'm also going to show how to set up multiple websites on the same server, which is something that's of interest. So those two things, setting up SSL certificates and running multiple installations on the same server, are two awesome features that a lot of people struggle with. So I'm going to cover that in this video, and so let me just walk through the objectives. But this is going to be a rather lengthy video because it's going to be so extensive and it covers such a broad topic. But it's your chance to sort of look over my shoulder and see how I set up ConnextCMS installations for our clients, for our web clients, and how you can too. So here's what I'm going to cover in this video. I'm going to walk through the block diagram of the containerization scheme. So I'll cover that in a minute. It doesn't make much sense, right? Just written like that. But I'm going to introduce the base snapshot that I'm using. I'm going to be using Digitalocean, and it's going to be a Ubuntu 16.10 operating system. And all I've done so far is I've changed the DNS. Anyways, I'll get into the details here, kind of give you a background of where I'm starting so that you know where to start from. And then I'm going to set up a new droplet, and then I'm going to clone and set up ConnextCMS with Docker Compose. And then I'll set up the SSL certification, and then I'm going to do a second installation after that, so you can see what it's like to install two websites on the same server. And some of the things I'm not going to cover are sort of the wrap-up things that you would do when you create a website, like create a robots.txt file. Or I'm not even sure if the extension's txt, but a robots file, and a term of service, and adding analytics tracking code. These are sort of minor details I won't cover that most web administrators are expected to know how to do. So let's just dive right in here. The block diagram I was talking about can be found. So mainly what I want to show you here is this Docker ConnextCMS repository. This is where you want to go to get our latest Docker Compose file. And so this is on GitHub. Here's the GitHub repository. And here's step-by-step installation instructions. If you go to the Nginx directory, there is this default. This is a example configuration file for Nginx. So what Nginx is, if you're not familiar with it, is it's many things, but among others, it's a proxy. And so what it does is it lets you run multiple websites on the same server, because the Nginx sort of handles all the incoming traffic and then figures out how to route that traffic to the different things. So this is kind of a block diagram of our host system and what it's going to look like. So we'll have our host system, which is going to be our underlying Linux operating system, and then Nginx is going to be running on port 80, and it's going to be handling the incoming traffic, and then it's going to forward that traffic to our Docker container. And inside of our Docker container is a MongoDB container and a ConnextCMS container. And these two talk to one another. And but anyways, internet traffic flows in into Nginx, which is running on port 80. It'll look at the web traffic and figure out which website they're requesting, and then forward that onto the proper website. The thing that the C here is that this box, the Docker box, this will be replicated for every website we run on the same server. So Nginx will be figuring out, so the two websites I'm going to use in this demo is rpibroker.com and rpibroker.org. They're just two domains that I registered. I'm going to do something with them in the future, but right now I'm not using them, so I'm going to use them for this demo. And so when someone requests either the .com or the .org, which are two separate websites, it doesn't have to be the same domain. I could do abc.com and xyz.com. The fact that they are the same doesn't matter. They're just my convenience for the demo. But anyways, as they come in, the DNS will point to this host system. They'll come in, let's say it's, you know, rpibroker.com. It's going to look at that and it's going to route the traffic to the proper Docker container running the right web server, or it's actually an Express application running in Node. And so that's basically how it's going to work. But the main takeaways that you should get from this is that by running ConnextCMS inside of a Docker container, we can spin up a new web server with a single command, and then we can duplicate these Docker containers for every website we want to run on the same host system. And so it scales in that way, and because we're using cloud servers through DigitalOcean, the host system itself can scale, so we can use a minimal server running, you know, 1 gig of memory and a single processor, and then if we wanted to, we can add more and more websites and scale it up, and add more memory and more hard drive space, and scale up the host system. So there's a lot of options here in terms of scaling. I love the cloud server VPS style of doing things, because when you take a backup, you back up the entire server, not just like a database. The other nice thing of containing everything in a Docker container is that the database, which is where all the information for your website lives, or all the user-generated information at least, moves along, and it's in a well-known directory, and it lives there, and it's really easy to back up. And we'll get into that in a little more detail as we walk through the installation. But this is basically the basic idea. So that was the block diagram. So let me introduce you to the snapshot I'm using. So I like to use PuTTY, and I'll just take you to DigitalOcean. So I've got some snapshots here. This is the temp demo. We're running 1 gig of memory and a 30 gig hard drive. And all I've done to this VPS is I chose the Ubuntu 16.10 operating system. I went to my registrar and I changed the DNS for rpibroker.org and rpibroker.com and pointed it at this droplet. And the way you do that is you go into networking. There's tutorials on the DigitalOcean website if you want to get a little more detail on this. But I went to networking and set up the domain, and this is kind of what it looks like. Is this is all generated. Here's the A record pointing org to the droplet, the IP address for the droplet, and then a C name, so that way people can type in www or nothing at all or whatever .rpibroker.org, and it doesn't matter. It'll catch everything before the rpibroker.org and send it to the same address. And so that's the basic outline there. So that's, and I've created a non-root user named Trout, which is what I normally use. And so that's all I've done. So we're basically, the network DNS stuff is set up, and we've got a brand new droplet. So you should basically be starting from nearly the same point when you start as I'm starting now, and so that's the point that I'm making. So let's set up our new droplet. I like PuTTY, and demo load. This is what it looks like. So I'm on a Windows machine, and in a future video I'm going to show how to replicate the production environment here on my local machine using VirtualBox. I've covered that a little bit in a previous video, but I haven't used the Docker Compose script in that video. So I'm going to shoot a new video showing how to create your own local development environment on a Windows machine and replicate everything that's going on in this production environment. But today I'm going to focus on this production environment. So I'm going to log into my droplet, and you can see there's nothing here. I'm in my home directory. It's brand new. So first of all, I need to install Docker and Docker Compose. So if you go to the Docker Compose repository or Docker ConnextCMS repository and follow the installation instructions, there are several links here. One of the things I'm going to do first that's not in here because it's optional is I'm going to add 2 gigabytes of swap space. And DigitalOcean doesn't really like this, but I do it anyway. And so you can see, if I do free H, this shows the memory on the system, and you can see I have 1 gig, just under 1 gig, and I have no swap. And swap space turns your hard drive space into memory like RAM, and except it's really slow because it's using the hard drive, but it prevents you from getting like out of memory errors, which is like the kiss of death for every program. So I don't, on a day-to-day operation, like if you're monitoring the memory level of your droplet, you should not be using your swap memory for that. You need to increase your memory for the actual day-to-day usage. But when you're installing stuff like I'm about to do, that can take a lot of memory, and that's just transient. It just happens during the install. It never happens again, and running out of memory can cause a lot of problems that are hard to debug. So that's why I'm adding the swap. I could remove it later. I never do, but that's just sort of the reason why I like to add swap. So I'm on this DigitalOcean tutorial. You can see the URL right here. And I'm just going to copy some of these instructions. I've done this before, so I'm going to go pretty fast. And also, this is a video, so you can pause and rewind. And there it is. So I love these DigitalOcean tutorials because they're like a recipe book. You can just follow the copy and paste the commands, and moves pretty fast. Alright, there's my swap. Now I just got to make it permanent. Okay, so now I've got some 2 gigs of swap memory installed, and that's going to pop up when I reboot. And now I'm going to follow the link on this tutorial to install Docker. And I highly recommend reading through these. I've just done this so many times that I don't need to. And again, if you're wondering where they are, there's the links. The swap one's not in here because it's optional, but I've got links there in the README of the GitHub repository. And there's going to be a lot of installation stuff that's going to take time as I do this, particularly when I do the Docker Compose command to install ConnextCMS. That takes a while, so I'll pause the video, and so the installations are going to look a lot faster than they actually are. Oh, and I want to point out, so I like using these DigitalOcean droplets, and they cost, you know, the cheapest one costs $5 a month, which is usually more than enough, but I like to do the 1 gig when I'm doing Docker. But if you go to ConnextCMS and you go to this clone your own copy, there's an affiliate link right here. Use this link and you'll get a $10 credit to your account. So if you do the 1 gig droplet, that's a free month, and if you do the 500 megabyte droplet, that's 2 months that you get for free of usage. So it's a pretty good deal. Okay. And it's a great way to try this out, because that way you don't have to install anything on your own computer, and you're using a really consistent environment. Okay, I'm sure it's running. Yeah, and then I'm going to do this. Okay. Okay, so Docker is installed and running. So now step 2, I'm going to install Docker Compose. So yeah, it's downloading it. Normally doesn't take very long. Okay, so Docker Compose is running now. And so I'm going to create 2 directories here in my home directory. I'm going to one for the .com and one for the .org. So I'm going to call it archibroker.com and org. By doing it this way, it just saves time, because now I can, if I want to change directory, I can just do CO tab and it autofills, and it wouldn't do that if it had named the other way, because the beginning it would have started with archibroker for both of them. So now I'm going to clone the Docker CMS repository and go into that directory. And so here's the magic command, docker compose up-d. And what this is going to do is it's going to download the MongoDB Docker image. In fact, let me show you Docker images. So right now I have no images. So when I run this command, up-d, it's going to download the MongoDB image, and it's going to download ConnextCMS and Keystone.js. It's going to compile everything, and I'm going to end up with a running copy of ConnextCMS with just this one command. And this is going to take a while, because it's got to download and compile, and this is where those out-of-memory errors can creep up, because it's all the compilation is a very memory-intensive thing, but you're only going to have to do this, once. And yeah, anyway, so I'm going to pause the video here and come back when the installation is complete. Okay, so it completed building, and you'll see here, successfully built, successfully tagged, and then the up-d command that I ran brings it up. Brings the services up, and the -d is for daemon mode, so it makes it act like a service. It runs in the background, and you can see that here where it created the Docker containers, and now they're running. And then I ran this command, docker ps, and it's showing that they're up and running. So it's up and running, and if I pull up the IP address of this droplet right here, it comes up by default on port 3000, just like Keystone.js does. And so there it is. There's our new ConnextCMS installation running on top of Keystone, running on port 3000. So let's recap what we did. Oh, and then also, because I've already set up the DNS, like I said before, I can go to archibroker.com, port 3000. And the same website, because the DNS resolves to that IP address. And so let's see where we're at here. So we've installed Docker and Docker Compose. We added the swap. I showed you the DNS setup. We cloned and set up with Docker Compose. And okay, so now the basic site's up. How do you customize this? How do you create your own custom website. So first of all, I'm going to take this, let's see, it's up and running, so I'm going to take this down by going docker compose down. So that's going to shut down my Docker containers. And then I can verify that they're no longer running by doing ps. And let's see, so I want to go into the theme directory, and this directory is probably going to change its name. I don't know why I chose theme. But anyways, this is where you want to go. I'll probably change the name to site, because what I did is created a plugin and a theme directory as well as a public directory. And these three are persistent directories as well as the data directory. So let me talk about that for a minute. The data directory is where MongoDB, the MongoDB Docker image, stores the database. So this is the database for your website. It lives in this directory, and this is where the data gets persisted when the containers get created and destroyed and or brought up and taken down. The database data is stored in this data directory. So if you want to back up your database, that's where it lives. And same thing goes with the plugins, the public, and the theme directory. These are persistent directories that exist both on the host system and inside the Docker container. So the public directory is a copy of all the static files, your CSS files, your JavaScript files, your HTML files. And this is important because this Nginx is going to use this directory to serve up that static information, because it's a lot more efficient at doing that than Node and Express is at serving that. They can both do the same thing, but Nginx is faster and more efficient. And then the plugins directory is empty, because this is where you would install ConnextCMS plugins, and the theme directory is empty because this is where you would install your site templates, and let's do that right now. I'm going to go to, what is this? There's the ConnextCMS. Here's a site template. So one thing I should point out is I just released, what is it? It's July 24th, 2017, and I just released 3 new versions for ConnextCMS. So this is the Docker ConnextCMS repository we've been using, and everything I'm covering in this video goes over version 1.02. And I also released ConnextCMS alpha version 11, which was modified to work with the Docker ConnextCMS repo, and I also just released version 1.0 of the site template, which is also designed to work with those 2 other repositories. So if we go to the site template and clone that, this is all you need to start customizing your template. And out of the box, what you want to do is go to the public directory, and there's this merge site plugin files. Let's look at that. This gets run at runtime, and this is where you want to put in a link to the shell script that's going to merge your customized website into all this default stuff. And out of the box, it comes just like ready to go, basically. It assumes you're going to clone the site template. So it already changes directory into where we just cloned it, and then runs that merge script. So it's the same thing as going, actually let me just copy this. It's the same thing as going here, as doing this. Oh, because it's assuming, yeah, it's because it's being run inside the container, and we're not inside the container right now. But basically it's the same thing as running this merge script, and this is what you're going to want to customize. So everything inside this site template ConnextCMS directory is where you're going to, that's going to be your site. That's where you're going to customize your site, and you'll probably want to rename this directory after you clone it, and probably create your own GitHub repository based on the files in this. But the merge script is just a bash shell script, and right now it's really basic. It just moves all the keystone files to where they need to be, for your customized code. So right now, let's do that. Let's go into Keystone. And I've covered this in previous videos and in the documentation, but this installation of Keystone.js that comes with ConnextCMS uses the handlebars template language, and that's why the extension is HBS. But they're really just, you can treat them like HTML files. So I'm going to use the Nano text editor, and I'm going to edit the index file, and let's see. So this is what it looked like. I'm going to change this. You've successfully launched. Let's see. So I'm going to change this to rpibroker.com. In fact, let's just make it really obvious that we're on the .com page. Okay, so I changed that, and so now, oh, I still have caps lock on. I'm going to head back up here. So now when I bring the Docker container back up, it's going to call this merge site plugin files script, which is going to call the merge site script inside the site template directory. So that's how it's working. So again, I'm going to do docker compose upd, and that's not going to take as long because the images are already built, so it's really just spinning up the existing images. I can do docker ps to show the processes, and you can see they're there. I can refresh the page, and bam, there's our changes. So that's how you customize your site. For more details on customizing the template, check out some of the other videos. I go a lot more into depth into the files that you need to work with, but basically this is the summary right here. So that's how you start actually customizing your site. However, we go up here and view site information. You can see it's not secure. It's just using regular HTTP, and the trend these days is to secure your site with SSL certificates so that people can use HTTPS. So let's figure out how to do that. So we cloned the site template, we customized it. Let me point out a few things before we move on to the SSL certificates. It's going to be easier if I just show it here. The Keystone.js file that comes with the Docker ConnextCMS repository is a little different. It has these extra things. The file limit, 50 megabytes. This allows you to upload files up to 50 megabytes to the site. So you can make that bigger or smaller depending on what you want. This is kind of an issue if you're running a site that involves uploading large files. That's something you going to want to be available or be aware of. This line for the Mongo changes the location, specifically the port. The default port, I don't know off the top of my head, 27 something. But anyways, the ConnextCMS runs Mongo. It doesn't. I don't want to conflict with any existing Mongo installations that might be on servers, so I gave just a custom port with a nice round number, which is 3500. So that's what this line does, is it tells Keystone.js where to find Mongo. Oh, and the port settings, I have this set to 3000 by default, and so the next site I'm going to run, I'm going to have to change this so it'll run on 3001. And port 80 is the default port for websites. That's whenever you request some website, it's coming through on port 80. And there are security issues with port 80 that I've covered in other videos, how to get around. But the reason I'm running at port 3000 is because Nginx is going to be running on port 80, and it's going to, based on which website the user is requesting, it's going to route it to the different websites which are running on. So this one will run on port 3000. Point out moving the public directory for Nginx use. Okay, yeah, I already did that, but I'll do it again. So we're not inside the container. So this public directory, when I spin up ConnextCMS, everything gets copied to this persistent public directory on the host system, and that's so that Nginx can, we're going to point Nginx at this directory and say, serve static content from this directory, and do it. And if you can't find something in this directory, then it'll go back to ConnextCMS and say, hey, I couldn't find the static file, so it must be a dynamic file, so you handle it and you serve it. I'll go into more detail there in a minute when we cover the Nginx setup. Setup users. Okay, so yeah, so now that before we start customizing the site and worrying about Ssl certificates, let's actually set it up. So if we go to dashboard, we can log in with the default login and password, same as with Keystone, and that's going to be user@keystonejs.com with password admin. So user@keystonejs.com, password admin. And that's going to shoot you over to the dashboard. Now, the reason ConnextCMS does this, and again, I've covered this in other videos, but I'll just cover it again, is by default, you have admin permissions. And I'm just going to run the console so we can see any errors that might pop up. By default, you're an admin, so if I try and get to the Keystone dashboard, it's not going to let me, because it's going to say, hey, you're not a super user, you don't belong here. And so Keystone has just 2 security levels. It has regular users, or it has, I guess it has 3. It has regular users that don't have logins, and then there's users with logins, but they don't have access to the Keystone admin UI, and then there's admins that do have access to the Keystone admin UI. And ConnextCMS creates another that's super users, admins, and then just regular users. And by default, you're an admin. So the way to set up the website is you want to open up a console log, type in this user data, and get your GUID, your ID number. And what you want to do is go in here to the public directory and edit the public settings JSON file inside the JS directory. And you want to copy your user ID in here. And then this will let Keystone recognize that user account as a super user. And it can't do this at boot up because this ID is generated at every new install, so it can't do this ahead of time. That's why this is a manual process. Oh, you know why? Because, okay, that's my mistake. I can't edit this public directory directly. It's going to overwrite that every time. So what I need to do, let's check and see how the script's running. I'll tell you what, let's just add it to our merge script. So we're going to add it right in there. We're going to say, where did I put? I put that right here. I'm going to move that into there. And in fact, let's move it into our site template, because that's really where it should live. That, and let's edit our site template to copy let's see, that's going to be right here. Oh, in fact, I got that name wrong. It's publicsettings.json. So there we go. So when this merge script gets run, it'll copy that in there, and that's what needs to happen. So now, if I go docker compose down, bring it down, up. Now if I go into that public directory and having a problem with my A button. Let's just confirm. Okay, so CDA9. Okay, so we got the right one now. So now if I refresh, now I've got these new options, site settings and the Keystone admin UI. And if I click in here, I can see my super user ID that I copied in right there, so it's identifying me. So this is my user data, there's my ID, and there's my ID. So now the system knows that I am a super user and I can access the admin UI. I've covered this section in other videos, but this is how you would set up Mailgun. Is you'd have a domain that you register with Mailgun, like mgarchivebroker.org or .com in this case. They would give you your API key. You'd paste that in here, and then you could put in your admin emails here. And this is whenever there's an issue with your site, like some code crashes or something, you'll get an error log emailed to you. And then you can also add in, you can do a comma and add in other user IDs. So let me show you how to do that. So right now we're using the default login and password. We don't want to do that. And by going to the Keystone admin UI, we can change the login name and the password for this super user that we just set up without actually changing the GUID, the user ID. So like the user account's the same as far as Keystone is concerned, and we just change the username and password. And that way we don't have to change any more settings in the operating system. This admin UI in Keystone, it takes a while to come up the first time. It's pretty snappy after you load it previous times, but the first time it gets loaded when the server comes up. I don't know why it takes a while. There we go. So we can go into users and change our admin user. So your emails, your login, and so I'm going to say, so it's the same user, and this is also where we can go to create new users. So we can, click this button, create new users, and then you can see if you click on the user, their ID pops up right here. It also pops up here in the URL. This is what you need to copy into that JSON file right here. And this is just comma separated. So now that you have access, you don't have to access the file directly anymore, because now you're set up and you can access it through the ConnextCMS user interface. But if I wanted to add more users, I would just add, their GUID here, and I would be GUID. I can add as many users as I want, and I can, depending on which box they go in, they're either a super user or an admin user. So that's how that works. Okay, set up public settings, and I just showed you how to set up Mailgun. And let's see, customize the merge script to run at runtime. We actually just did that by this here, the site template right here. We just edited this merge script to copy in the JSON file at runtime so that it knows the proper user accounts.